Welcome back for another edition of Forage Focus. On today's show, we'll be talking about holiday leftovers and how they could be used in livestock systems. There are many ways that you can recycle things left over from the holidays and give them a second useful life. We'll talk about ways that are appropriate and those that may not be appropriate, depending on the situation you have and the animals in your care. Stay tuned. Fall and winter holidays often incorporate a great deal of naturalized materials, both for decor and for the preparation of meals. When it comes time to transition into another season of decor, or time to dispose of decor and move into our regular lives again, there may be questions about how the recycled materials could be used either as livestock feed, bedding, toys, or composted and returned to the soil in a usable form. Some of the examples of common leftovers from the holidays include pumpkins, squash, corn stalks, hay, straw, and also low quality fruits that are left over, maybe haven't been used or have expired of the time of ideal use for humans, the scraps from preparing meals, especially vegetable scraps, and then even evergreen boughs or trees may be considered as recyclable materials for animals. Whether the animals on your farm are companion animals or true livestock used in production, there are likely some things you have left over from the holidays that they could enjoy as treats. We're going to talk about ways that cattle, sheep, goats, poultry, swine, horses, rabbits, and even fish could benefit from some of the leftovers recycled in a new way for their benefit. Each type of livestock has its own concerns and preferences on what they may like to eat or have in their environment and things that may potentially be dangerous for them. We're going to talk about various types of materials that could be recycled or fed to livestock and elaborate more on those that should not. Many of the cases on the screen here are ruminant livestock that will traditionally be in a grazing system, and it is important to remember that anytime we change an animal's diet from its normal feed ration, we are likely to cause digestive upset. So what we do provide needs to be given in moderation as a treat or a snack, unless you have the ability to incorporate the help of a nutritionist into your program. If you were able to receive large amounts of leftover material from a large source, you could potentially work that into your feeding program, but it does take careful consideration to balance the ration and keep your animals in good condition. But in the case of today's presentation, we're really going to focus on the utilization of those materials as snacks or enrichment in the environment. The first leftover that we'll elaborate on is food scraps. What we're talking about in this case are leftovers from the preparation of a meal, or the leftovers that are cleared off the table after a meal is served. Food scraps in many ways can be fed successfully to livestock, but we do want to make sure that we're considering all of the things that are on the screen. In some cases, it's best to provide food scraps that are fresh, as in uncooked, and in some cases, it's better for them to be cooked. For example, potatoes are often a question of contention in the backyard chicken discussion because many people would like to feed potato peels to chickens. But actually, what's recommended is to only feed cooked potato products to livestock because there are some substances in an uncooked potato that could cause issues in the digestive tract. And so it is something to consider on whether the scraps are best suited for the animals cooked or fresh. Another thing to consider are the seasonings that may be on the food in which we are passing on to the livestock. We don't want to feed anything that's overly salty or overly fatty. Again, this can cause digestive upset. It can cause issues with the regulation of moisture in the body as salt draws water out of cells. And also, it's not going to be particularly enriching for the livestock if we have materials in there that slow digestion rather than aiding digestion. Another thing to consider is the material spoiled? If it's spoiled, you don't want to eat it, and your livestock certainly won't want to eat it either. By feeding spoiled material, we can actually cause illness to our animals, and that's instead of going to be a treat, be something that may lead to a visit with the veterinarian. And so if the food is spoiled, it's best to dispose of it in the garbage or in a compost bin rather than passing it on to livestock. And that's especially true for things that you may be cleaning out of your refrigerator after they've been served. If it's not good enough for you to eat, it's probably not good enough for the livestock to eat either. Another thing to consider is your target animal. Some items are great for one type of livestock and wouldn't be good for another type. Rabbits, for example, whether you have rabbits in commercial production systems or as a pet, there's many items that are wonderful for rabbits to have that maybe you could give to a cow as well, but not everything is cross-relatable. So brush up on what plants and other household items are considered poisonous to the class of livestock you're managing at home. Goats will often consume a lot of things that other animals won't eat, but it is questionable sometimes on whether they should or should not be eating those items. We also want to consider the particle size of whatever it is we're providing. When we feed food scraps, we can actually put up the potential for a choking hazard depending on the size of the animal and the way it ingests its food. And so seeds often are perfectly fine for chickens, but are not fine for rabbits. And we can feed pumpkins to many classes of livestock. Of all of the livestock on the slide that I first provided, aside from fish, all of those livestock would enjoy pumpkins. But some of them may be uh, less able to break the pumpkin into smaller pieces in order to ingest it. And so we may be able to leave the pumpkins whole. We may need to cut them into smaller pieces. Taking in mind how the animal brings the food to their body and in what size they take a bite is going to tell us if we need to prepare the food in a way that's different than how we've prepared it for ourselves in order to feed it to our livestock. We certainly don't want to pose a choking hazard for any of our animals by just trying to share some treats with them. Common food scraps that could be provided to most types of livestock include melons, squashes, vegetables such as carrots, celery, the tops of leafy greens or root vegetables such as the tops of beets or turnips, many types of greens like kale or Swiss chard could also be provided to animals. Those could be the types of leaves that maybe weren't pretty enough for your table but are still good enough to eat. Breads, in many cases, can be fed to livestock. It's important, again, as I mentioned previously, to feed these things in moderation just as a snack. And then also keep in mind the feeding preferences and habits of the types of animals you have. If you are feeding omnivores like chickens and swine, you have more flexibility on what they'll be able to eat than if you're dealing with a strict herbivore such as ruminant livestock or rabbits. We do want to provide material that's close to what they would eat in their natural environments. Another thing that's commonly enjoyed is apples. Many types of fruits, such as berries, could be provided as a treat to livestock, including horses and rabbits as well. Goats, chickens, sheep would all enjoy some fruit scraps from your table, but again, making sure that they are in good condition, not moldy, not spoiled, is important, and that they're the right particle size. Feeding decor items is something that gets a little bit more tricky. Yes, you read that right. There are some decor items that you could feed to livestock, but there's additional considerations with these. Often when we take naturalized decor into our homes or display it on our homes, we add embellishments to it that wouldn't be found in nature. Things like glitter or paint or metal fasteners, wires, in order to hold it on to the surface or add something pretty to it. And we definitely don't want that to wind up in the mouths of our livestock or their stomach. We don't want to make anything sick on accident by trying to provide a treat. I continue to say that just to drive the point home. A lot of folks will use leftover pumpkins from their fall decor to feed to animals, whether it's their livestock or wildlife, and that's certainly an acceptable use. If the squash or pumpkin is not moldy, good. If it doesn't have paint, if it doesn't have glitter, if it doesn't still have the candle inside from a jack-o'-lantern, yes, you can feed that material to livestock or wildlife. I have an example of a wreath on the slide here, and on this wreath you can see examples of nuts, pine cones, cinnamon sticks. Some of those items could be fed to livestock, other would need to be removed. We definitely want to remove any types of fasteners that hold the material onto the wreath and then remove the base wreath material as well. We don't want to accidentally ingest a metal pin or a metal wire when we're giving that material to the livestock. But goats, with their browsing habits, actually will eat a lot of evergreen material. The needles can be very high in vitamin C and a tasty snack, as well as provide some interest to the environment for animals like goats, as well as chickens, rabbits, and poultry may enjoy perching on top of the trees. One way that you can recycle trees as well is to put them in the environment for fish, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But we definitely want to make sure that any embellishments added to that naturalized decor are removed before being fed. Corn stalks are another one that are very common in the harvest season, and those could be given to livestock, but we do want to make sure that they don't have mold present. If they've been subjected to heavy moisture, they may not be suitable to feed anymore and would be better discarded in the garbage or in the compost pile. Again, checking to make sure nothing is spoiled, that it's not poisonous to the target animal, and also that the particle size is appropriate for ingestion still applies to these decor items. Essentially, if you have any doubts on whether the material would be okay for the animal, don't feed it to them. Only those that you're absolutely sure based on your research and the information provided are those that you want to give. Something also to be aware of are sometimes there are materials in fall decor in a mixed display that may be poisonous to livestock. One of the biggest concerns is the use of yew plants. And yew is a common landscape plant that can sometimes be incorporated into decor for the wintertime, and yew is poisonous to all classes of livestock. And that's one of the reasons why it is discouraged to put clippings from any ornamental plants into a pasture with livestock, because you could accidentally cause a poisoning in that case. And it is important as well to remember that any items that we're giving to livestock, this is assuming that the livestock are your own on your property. Anytime that you have recycled items that you think would be good to contribute to an animal's environment, you should check with the owner of those livestock, because it is illegal to feed byproducts to animal that you don't own without permission, and also that could be posing a risk for them if the animal is not able to ingest the material, and if the person in charge is not aware that they've ingested it, they may not be able to apply the appropriate treatment if something does occur. So in all the cases that we're talking about today, we are assuming that the recycled materials are being given to your own livestock, not your neighbors, not somebody down the street, to yours and yours alone. As mentioned previously, you do want to make sure that you're up to date on which foods and plants are considered poisonous for your classes of livestock in your care. And those lists can be found from a variety of sources. They can be found from federal agencies. They can be found from humane societies that list them for companion animals like rabbits and horses. You can also find them for poultry, swine, and cattle, sheep, and goats as well. Some things that are typically consistent across the board that we want to avoid are listed here on the slide. In these cases where we're feeding leftover scraps, we definitely want to avoid any meat scraps. There are severe issues that can occur when we feed ruminant livestock, ruminant byproducts, and also swine products. We also have the tendency to attract scavenger pests to the area if we're feeding meat scraps. And so in all cases, I'm going to discourage the feeding of meat scraps as we continue talking. Anything that is fed needs to be prepared appropriately, and thus it's too complicated to condone the feeding of meat scraps in the topic here where we're looking at holiday leftovers. So avoid meat scraps in all situations. Many classes of livestock will have reactions negatively to onions and garlic. And so we want to avoid the use of those in thus the feeding of leftovers. In some cases where they're cooked and it's in small amounts, it won't cause a severe issue, but we don't want to feed these materials raw or in large quantities. Raw potato, as I mentioned, is a concern for most classes of livestock. A few potato skins here or there will likely not cause severe issues, but the best way to provide potato scraps is to provide them cooked. So if you cook the potato with the skin on, you could provide the potato skins after, or you could provide leftovers of cooked potatoes if they are not heavily salted or have a lot of fat in the mixture. So as I mentioned, heavily salty or heavily fatty foods can cause digestive upset, and just like they can for people. And we want to avoid those types of byproducts if they're being fed as a treat to livestock. Artificial sweeteners as well can cause some pretty severe impacts on animal health, and so you want to avoid the feeding of any artificial sweeteners that may be in our leftovers and anything that could potentially be contaminated, whether that's contaminated, cross-contaminated from, say, touching meat material and then going to vegetables, or that may be contaminated with mold or bacteria. And that leads into spoiled foods. When we're looking at leftovers, what we ideally want to do is take them straight from our food preparation area and get them to the livestock as soon as possible, and also fed in a clean container rather than on the ground, where manure could also be picked up with the food and ingested. If you have any hesitation at all when it comes to feeding scraps, don't do it. Just avoid the situation and put those scraps either in your compost pile or in the garbage. If you have questions about whether something may or may not be safe to feed to your animals, you can always consult the expertise of a veterinarian. I've mentioned it earlier, and I will mention it one more time here with you all. If we are going to be feeding leftovers from our holiday tables, we want to make sure that we are doing this in moderation. Unless you are working with a nutritionist to incorporate large amounts of byproduct from human use into the animal's daily ration, we want to treat these materials as snacks rather than as part of the whole diet for the animal. Just like if we were to consume large amounts of ice cream for every meal, we would likely have some issues with our productivity and also our digestion. We want to make sure we're avoiding those types of situations for our livestock and providing these tasty treats for them in small amounts so that they stay tasty treats rather than something that causes an illness, discomfort, or decrease in productivity. If you have specific questions about the source of a material that could potentially be incorporated as daily feed, that is something to talk with a nutritionist about and work into your feeding program. Or if you have questions about a specific type of livestock and a specific feed that you're not able to find the information for, consult with your veterinarian before feeding. Habitat enrichment is another way that recycled holiday materials could be used for the benefit of animals, whether wild or in a domestic situation. Many animals are intrigued by pushing large vegetables or fruits around in their pens, playing with them, stomping on them, tasting them, and also providing places in which they could play hide and go seek. And so small livestock often enjoy having something added to their environment to change up the basic routine, add something that they can climb on, hide in, take a nap underneath. And so sometimes our holiday decor can even be incorporated into their environment just to change up the pace of the day to day. And they could also be incorporated to attract other types of wildlife that you would like to see in your environment. Or they could just be there to take up space until you're ready to put them in a compost pile or take them out to the garbage. And so, as we've discussed previously, we want to make sure anything that winds up in the pen or in the system with our animals, that it's not poisonous for them to be around if it were accidentally ingested. And we want to make sure that any of the vegetation that is put into the environment is untainted. And by that, You mean metal-free, mold-free, doesn't have glitter, doesn't have holiday decorations left on, um, a hook or tinsel left behind because we don't want that being caught in the reticulum of our ruminant livestock or in the soft belly tissue of another animal. So absolutely, naturalized materials can be returned to nature and enjoyed as part of the habitat for the animals to thrive in, but we want to make sure that we are returning them in a natural state with all of the things we've added to them in our homes or in our on our porches removed so that it doesn't pose a threat to them. We also want to make sure that if we are taking any of these materials to livestock, to a place where they are not our own, that permission is granted by the person who owns the livestock. In some cases, you will see calls for Christmas trees to be donated to goats or donated to zoos, the same with pumpkins. Many animals will find enrichment with the additions of these to their environments, but you do want to make sure you're going through the appropriate routes to donate those materials so that they can be processed appropriately and then provided to the livestock in a way that's helpful rather than hurtful. We never want to dump items over the fence to the neighbor's property without notifying someone of what we're bringing, when and why, and checking to see if that's okay. You definitely would want to provide that material to the farm manager and allow them to make the decision rather than assume that this would be a nice treat. That way, you're not assuming responsibility for what happens to that animal, and you're not potentially setting them up for a situation that could be harmful. There are many ways that you can recycle holiday trees after Christmas time, and those could be the addition of them to a compost pile. They could be chipped and made into mulch, or they could even be sunken in a pond to provide fish habitat. I alluded to that use previously, and so you could have situations in your local community where there is a drive for recycled trees to be added for fish habitat. On your own property, if you have a pond or a lake and you're looking to increase habitat for fish, either out towards the center of the lake or the pond or towards the edge, you can sink a tree uh, and allow it to be part of the environment for fish habitat. And that could increase some of the opportunities for anglers that may utilize your pond. Who says humans are the only ones that benefit from the holidays? There are many ways that we can share what we have left with the animals surrounding us, whether domestic or wild, and I hope that you will consider those ways that may be appropriate in your homes and on your farms this season. If you have questions about any of the material provided in today's episode, please feel free to contact me, Christine Gelley, at the Noble County OSU Extension Office. My job is to interact with anyone in the field of agriculture and natural resources, meeting the local needs of our clientele, and that includes farmers, landowners, home gardeners, and any member of the general public. So if you have questions about any of this material or in the scope of another situation, feel free to reach out. You can reach me either by phone or email with the contact information that is on the screen. Thank you for watching this episode of Forage Focus. If you'd like to learn more about various ways that forages are used in agriculture, you can visit one of the websites that's located here on the screen that are part of the Ohio State University. You can visit our beef team, sheep team, or forages team online and find a collection of related resources there. If you have additional questions about the sources of information for today's episode, you can consult any of the links provided here for additional information. We hope you'll join us next month for another edition of Forage Focus.